So a very warm welcome to the Global Development Masterclass, Fraternity and Radical Love in a World of Surging Hate, organized by the BA Global Development and the MA Global Development Politics, and co-organized with the Global Development Society and the Politics Society. We are delighted to welcome Dr. Harsh Mander, and one of the many things I appreciate about Harsh is that when we approached him to speak today about his pioneering work and give all of you a chance to learn for your careers and aspirations, his reply was that he was very happy to do so because young people are our greatest hope, which is a sentiment I fully share. Human rights and peace activist Harsh is a columnist, researcher and teacher. He's a chairperson of the Center for Equity Studies in Delhi, India, devoted to the analysis and development of public policy and law for justice and rights of disadvantaged groups. He leads a national initiative called Caravan of Love, which visits the families of those who have lost loved ones to hate violence to help support them with healing and seeking justice. Harsh also received an honorary doctorate from the University of York last year. And with that, Harsh, once again, a very, very warm welcome. Thank you so much for doing this, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judith. Thank you, Indrajit, and thank you all friends who've been able to join. So let me start right away. There are signs all around us of our world in great tumult. More and more people in country after country are choosing strong man and occasionally strong woman, authoritarian leaders who stoke hate and hostility against particular minorities and immigrants, persecute dissenters, are impatient with democratic processes and institutions, are coarse and uncivil in their public discourse, have close ties with big business, and display a spectacular absence of public compassion. And my worry, and I'd like to underline that right at the start, is not the leaders. It is ordinary people who in larger and larger numbers seem to be putting their faith and their futures with such leaders. We've seen that in the United States, and the elections in Germany seem to be leading us in the same direction. Germany was a country I spent almost a year in, and I enormously admired, more than I think people anywhere in the world. This is a country which decided to, over recent generations to confront its past, the violence and the hate, the massacres of its history, and to try to rebuild itself into a society which is compassionate and just and egalitarian and so on. But we see in the German elections, probably the neo-Nazi party is going to be the second largest. And this is almost in country after country, either the far right is coming to power or they become the biggest opposition. And it is people who are electing and choosing and putting their futures in their hands. We today inhabit a world in which the odds are higher that your neighbor will not look like you, worship like you, speak your language, eat, dress, sing, dance, love like you. The questions that this raises is how in increasingly diverse societies, how do we respond to people who we feel are different from us? Are we welcoming? Are we curious? Are we friendly? Or are we fearful, resentful, and full of hate? And once again, I'm seeing in election after election, we saw the United States, we saw Germany recently. Even the so-called centrist left opposition seems to actually be playing on the same sentiments about immigrants. And in my own country, it is the Muslim community, and we're seeing the same kind of hatred that is being generated openly by the far-right party in power. But those who are opposing them are also unwilling to speak out. Growing sections of the electorate in countries, as I say, are spanning all continents, are crowding behind people who are teaching us to be fearful, resentful, and full of hate. Subscribing to the politics of fear and hate against people of different faiths, skin color, beliefs, ways of life, stigmatizing them as outsiders, interlopers, people who do not belong. And as leaders erode, and these leaders erode the ideas of equal citizenship and fraternity, if you're a minority of any kind, religious, racial, ethnic, caste, class, gender, sexual, or if you're of the working classes, the prospects of life with dignity and security have become frighteningly precarious. The global pandemic also laid bare the catastrophic consequences of unconscionable levels of inequality, both between nations but also within nations. Writer Arundhati Roy, somewhere she said, COVID-19 is of course a virus, but she said it's also an X-ray. It's an X-ray that reveals in all its darkness the kind of world we have built. Unimaginable levels of wealth are concentrated in fewer and fewer hands, while millions continue to endure desperate hunger, dead-end, insecure jobs at dirt wages, homelessness, and disease. The survival of the planet itself is profoundly threatened. I'm convinced that when the history of these times will be written, this will be recorded as one of the most cruel periods of human history. There was, of course, much greater destitution, famine, epidemics in the past. But today the world has the resources many, many times over to ensure that no child has to sleep hungry, no child has to die because their parents can't afford health care. No older person has to sort of work till her last day, otherwise she won't get food. We have the capacity to end all of this. But it is important to recognize that we choose not. And so, in the light of all of this, I believe that humankind has clearly lost its way. We are in the midst of what is nothing less than a profound civilizational and moral crisis. Having said this, I also want to underline that the crushing of democracy around the globe has not been without challenge. Those who believe in a world of equity, justice, freedom, and kindness are everywhere resisting, often at great personal cost, the erosion of our collective moral order. However, all of this resistance is not enough. We must do a lot more to power, to seek, and to claim, and to build a society and a world which is just, equal, and kind. We need to come together across national boundaries, gender, race, caste, class, for the struggle. The struggle can only succeed, and it's important to remember this, it can only succeed when it becomes a collective enterprise. Struggles for a just, equal, and kind world are actually not new. They're timeless, probably as old as human civilization itself. Amartya Sen, in The Idea of Justice, observes that there's no human society anywhere in the globe and in any place, any period of history that is not characterized by some forms of injustice. But he goes on to say that it is equally true that every human society across the globe and in any period of history is also characterized by something else, and that is resistance to injustice. So Amartya Sen goes on to ask, what is it in human nature that makes resistance to injustice universal. And he finds his answer in 3 human characteristics. The first of these, he says, is the human quality of empathy, of feeling the pain of another as one's own. The second is the human capacity to reason. After experiencing the pain of injustice to oneself or to another, we have the facility to ask why and what must be done to end this injustice and suffering. And the third human trait that he speaks about is the universal love for freedom. It is these 3 human qualities, I repeat, empathy, reason, and a longing for freedom, that I believe must inform and drive our struggles to claim a world that is just, equal, free, and kind. As I said, and I repeat once again, this is a time of profound civilizational crisis. And at the same time, as I said, it is a time of great resistance. The question I ask now is, how do we deepen, how do we strengthen, how do we power this resistance? At the core of our resistance to our unjust world must lie, and I underline this, radical reimaginations of our collective futures. Just going back to the elections over the last year or so, think of each of them. Think of Kamala Harris, think of, the German, think of India, think of in each of these countries. If you listen carefully, there isn't too much difference between what the far right is offering and we seem to be offering from the left liberal place. On questions like immigration, on questions like social rights, healthcare, jobs, minority rights, education, higher education. What is it that we are, on the way we organize our economies, in the ways that we organize our society, what is our imagination for our futures, which is different, which is, I would say, radically different. These radical imaginations that I speak of as very critical to the resistance, and I feel that our resistance fails because we don't have these radical new imaginations. These radical new imaginations would need to address frontally many difficult questions on which the future of all people rests. For example, how can pluralism and the ideas of equal citizenship for people of every faith, color, ethnicity, language, and gender be defended against majoritarian assaults? What is our answer to this? How can all young people be assured decent work and hope for their lives? How can we save the planet in ways that are just to indigenous people, workers, women, and poorer nations? How can all people be assured a life of safety and dignity, including quality schooling for every child, free healthcare for all, rights at the workplace, decent housing, decent work, pensions for older people? I could go on. What are our imaginations for all of this? I argue that at the core of our struggles for a kinder, more equal, more just world, we must have a clear imagination of our futures. Further, I argue, and that's at the core of what I want to say here, I feel at the core of these radical new imaginations must lie the imagination and the practice of fraternity. We've spoken for long as democracy being, liberty, equality, and fraternity, but fraternity is a word that I think we understand, we discuss very little, we understand less, we practice least. The word fraternity, of course, has some problems. It literally means brotherhood, so it leaves out other genders. The Hindi word in India's constitution for fraternity is one I much prefer. This beautiful word is bandhuta. Derived from Sanskrit, bandhuta means whatever the differences in our faith, in our identity, our gender, and our class. We are all bound to and with each other. हम एक दूसरे से बंधे हुए हैं. What does this mean? It means I suffer your pain, your injustice as though it is mine. During the drafting of India's constitution, Dr. Baba Sahib Ambedkar, who led its drafting, spoke of the foundations of our constitution. He said the foundations lie in four principal ideas: justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. But he goes on to explain very interestingly that even among all of these ideas, the most primary is fraternity. He says this is because it is possible to imagine a society that accomplishes justice, liberty, and equality without fraternity. But this would then be only possible through the coercive power of the state. However, he says, if there is fraternity in society, justice, liberty, and equality would just become the normal order of things. And therefore, the most fundamental idea of a democratic society is fraternity. What is fraternity? There are many what I would call sibling ideas of fraternity. One of them, what Amartya Sen spoke about, empathy, my capacity to feel your pain as my own. Another sibling idea of fraternity is what I call egalitarian compassion. And by this I mean, there's one kind of compassion that I am up here and you are down here and you are the recipient of my compassion. But egalitarian compassion for me is that we are two equal people meeting each other. It's just that you have suffered enormous loss and injustice, and I share your pain. But I recognize that a day can come when I suffer great injustice and loss, and you will be there for me. That's what I call egalitarian compassion. Compassion between people of equal worth. Another is solidarity. One lesson from the pandemic, for instance, was that there were no solo individual escape exits possible. Many countries didn't learn it, many people did not learn it. But really when, countries in Europe and in North America, collected 10 times as much vaccine as they needed, when countries in Africa didn't have enough vaccines for 5 to 10% of their population, you thought you were saving yourselves. Even if practically actually you weren't. Because as long as there was anyone who was vulnerable to COVID anywhere in the world, you were vulnerable. And I think that's a very important lesson from the pandemic, that there are no individual escape exits possible. What has any chance of success is a struggle for collective human survival. Solidarity alone, between classes and gender, between races, between nations, between people and the planet, that alone will allow us to overcome. We can only overcome together. And one more wonderful sibling idea of fraternity is social caring. Noam Chomsky somewhere describes the core of a good society luminously. And I always believe that the greatest ideas in the world are always very simple. He said a good society is a place where we take care of each other. A place where we take care of each other. If you ask me, my radical imagination for our collective futures is, can we build a future where we take care of each other? And finally, there is radical love, about which I will speak presently. And I'll explain what I mean by it. But first, let me give one example in the time that I have of reimagining our futures based on Noam Chomsky idea, Noam Chomsky ideas, Noam Chomsky's idea simply that we should take care of each other. As I said, there can be no better encapsulation in my imagination of not just the good society, but also the good state. This is a state founded on the ethics and the politics of social solidarity, on the continuous mindfulness of the obligation of the state to care for every person, weak and strong. But Chomsky goes on to say that we live in times when this idea of caring for each other is considered a profoundly subversive and dangerous idea. For many, this idea of social protection or the public duty of social caring is indeed a dangerous philosophy which must be crushed at all costs. Incidentally, in my ongoing battles with my government and its ideology of hate, I'm often described as a very dangerous person. And it stuns me when I first heard, you can call me many things, but a dangerous person. And then I went back to what Chomsky said. The idea that we should take care of each other is today considered by many as a very dangerous and subversive idea that must be crushed at all costs. People who believe this way are convinced that markets are by themselves both necessary and sufficient to end poverty, hunger, and want. And they restrict their ideas of solidarity to narrow notions of identity, of race, of religion, of ethnicity, of community, of caste, or any other narrow identity. Often supremacist ideas of this kind converge with market fundamentalism to target minorities with hate politics fueled by crony capitalism. And that is where I see a lot of this coming together. It is therefore the moral case for social protection that we must make. It's easy actually to make the economic argument. When I was in the last government, I was asked to help draft the National Food Security Bill. And I could not understand, when it finally came up in Parliament, there were very few people in the political spectrum who were willing to defend it. And I found myself in front of television cameras every day trying to make a case for food for all. And I found everybody was angry, including most often even the television anchors. And I couldn't understand where this anger was coming from. And one day, one of these arguments, a very well-known industrialist turned to me and said, "I'm fed up. I can't take this any longer." So I said, "Why?" So she said, "I know I'm rich, but I worked hard to make my money. I've done nothing to harm the economy. Then why should I be taxed to feed the poor?" And it was a moment, it's one of those moments of epiphany which will stay with me all my life. I realized where this rage was coming from. And I said, "I'm sorry, the poor work much harder than you. They've done much less than you to harm the economy. And in a good society, we must take care of each other." As I said, I can make a very strong economic argument for the right to food. If every third child in India is still malnourished, every second woman is anemic, large sections have no access to higher education or even decent school education. So what kind of workforce are we building? If they are well educated, well nourished, have their morale would be better, they would be able to contribute more to the economy. I can make that argument, but I don't want to. I want to make the moral argument, because that is, I think, the core argument that we have to make. Because it is not in the nature of markets to care for people who they see as not useful in a direct utilitarian way. If people are not seen as either producers or consumers, why should they be supported? We are easily persuaded when the state tells us that it simply doesn't have enough money to ensure that every child gets nutritious food and good schooling, or that old people do not have to sleep hungry, or that homeless people do not have to sleep out in the cold, or that children do not have to die because their parents can't afford health care. You know, these are people for whom the markets can never work. Neoliberalism convinces us that markets will get to them one day, sometime, in the long run. But until then, they can do nothing better than wait, suffer patiently, without complaint and without resistance. And we do this, when I look at the budgets of my own country, the enormous tax holidays that the very wealthy, the super rich, are given, a fraction of it would be enough to provide healthcare and education for all. Oxfam calculates that a tax of 1 or 2% on the wealth of all dollar billionaires in the world is actually enough to provide healthcare and education for all. We must challenge the assumption that the pursuit of the highest possible pace of economic growth should in itself be the highest goal of society. A market society pursues exclusively the goal or the mirage of galloping economic growth. A good society is different. A good society must also preoccupy itself with everyone left out of this growth story. For this to happen, people of every social class and identity should be involved in a wide public debate about what is the floor of human dignity below which we will collectively ensure that no human being will be allowed to fall. For me, I can imagine to build a new social contract in which no child will sleep hungry, no child will sleep under the open sky, no child will be sent out to work instead of a school which is as good as a school for any child her age. No person will be subjected to discrimination or violence because of her identity. No person shall be denied free, good quality health care, and no older person will have to work or beg to live with dignity. We must demand that must find resources for all of this by greater taxing of the rich. This is just an example of, as I said, if we put fraternity at the center of our new imaginations, then we start looking for solutions. And I said, I'm running out of time. I just wanted to say a few words about radical imaginations for our shared futures, which must, I said, also be powered by radical love. What is radical love? This is love as politics, love as social philosophy, love that is driven by boundless courage, love so strong that I'm willing to give up my life so that you are not persecuted, that you don't suffer. One towering, luminous, historical example of radical love comes from my own country in the last months of Mahatma Gandhi's life, culminating in his assassination. Many of you would not be familiar. Rewind to the time of India's freedom, the year is 1947. The world is still rebuilding and healing from the devastation and wounds left by the Second World War, from the Holocaust which left 6 million Jews, 2/3 of the entire Jewish people in Europe dead in gas chambers by Nazi Germany led by Adolf Hitler, along with multitudes of Roma and Sinti people, homosexual men, persons with disability, and prisoners of war. The people of the world were learning from this horrific and tragic genocide the dangers of what happens in a country of minorities, whether they are religious, racial, ethnic, caste, or sexual, are not protected. They were learning the cataclysmic consequences of the politics of hate and division, a lesson that clearly large segments of the world have forgotten all over again. These were lessons also for the Indian people in 1947 when we became free. The same lessons rose from the horrific partition riots because the British left India not as one, but two countries, India and Pakistan. And when India finally shook off its shackles to become free in 47, this was amidst raging fires of unbearable pain and suffering, because the British, as I said, left not one but two countries, India and Pakistan, in frenzied riots on both sides of the new border, which now suddenly separated sister from sister, brother from brother. A madness of hate seized the subcontinent. 1 million people, Hindu, Muslim, and Sikh, slaughtered each other, and an uncounted number were raped and abducted. 14 million people were cruelly uprooted from their homes, traveling often on foot, weary and heartbroken, for hundreds of kilometers with their small children and their few belongings that they were able to salvage on their aching backs. There is only one larger distress migration which humankind has ever witnessed in the course of human history. This was the forced trafficking of Africans as slaves to the Americas. This mass rage fostered and fueled in India a demand that India, just as Pakistan was created as a country for Muslims, India should be a Hindu nation for Hindus, a mirror image of Muslim Pakistan. This, there were people who felt, would be a fitting answer to Muslim Pakistan and would secure justice for India's overwhelming Hindu majority. But Mahatma Gandhi was resolute. Our promise was and remained that India would be a kind and equal country, assuring equal citizenship for people of every faith, every identity, including the Muslim minority. Gandhi was not in Delhi to celebrate India's freedom on 15th August 47. Instead, he was in Calcutta trying desperately to end ceaseless butchery that was playing out there. He ultimately undertook an epic fast, pledging he wouldn't eat a morsel until the last hand raised to kill and maim was not lowered. People could not believe it was like a miracle, but violence came completely to an end. And a story that I briefly want to tell, there are many stories of that time. A very angry man, a Hindu man, came to Gandhi and said, "What you're doing is really wrong. I had a little boy this small, killed by Muslim mobs. How can I overcome the anger and the hate in my heart?" And what did Gandhiji answer? He said, "I understand your pain and anger, but let me tell you a way. Find a little boy this small, a Muslim boy whose parents have been killed by Hindu mobs. Adopt that child as your own. Raise him like your son in his own faith. Maybe you'll find the pain and the anger in your heart change." It was this that finally brought peace to Calcutta, as Gandhiji pitched his frail aging body against the mass rising of hate. Gandhi returned from Calcutta to a Delhi teeming with refugees, including my extended family, displaced from what was now Pakistan, heaving with hate and violence. Gandhi, devastated to his soul by the tumult of religious violence in India and Pakistan, entreated over and over again Muslims to stay on in an India that he pledged would belong equally in every way to its Muslim citizens. A very large number of Muslims heeded his call and chose at that time to make India their country, opting for multi-faith India over Muslim Pakistan. Gandhi believed in this idea of India so resolutely that he was willing even to give up his life for it. I look back with immense gratitude for this immeasurable moral courage that he demonstrated at the time of India's partition. This was his most agonized, but also his life's finest hour. His was what I call radical love. Love of such conviction that it defied the harshest tempests of hate with the most resolute moral courage. It is love based on such fierce courage and conviction that for my love and care of you, I should be willing, if called upon, to go to prison or even to give up my life. On the evening of 30th January 1948, as he walked to lead his daily all-religion prayer meeting, he was assassinated by a Hindu fanatic. It was his radical love, his insistence on humane and inclusive citizenship, and particularly that India would belong equally to its Muslim citizens, that led to his assassination. It is such radical love, fraternity, solidarity, social caring, the mindfulness that we must take care of each other. These must be the bricks of our struggles for a shared future of love and justice. May each of us join battle in small ways and big for this world that is kind, equal, and just. Let us bring a new world, build a new world in which if there are chains on your feet, I feel my freedom is stolen. Your hunger torments me. If there's pain in your heart, tears well up in my eyes. In the luminous words of James Baldwin, which I now carry on my email as a signature, he says, "Every dead child is my child. Every grieving mother is my mother. Every crying father is my father. Every home turned to rubble is the home I grew up in. We must build with the bricks of our hearts and minds, of our dreams and of our struggles, of our accomplishments, of our sacrifices, and I hope of our love." Thank you.